So you buy their cars or their houses that they could speed their own sales. And that actually providing credit was so lucrative that General Motors and GE and so on got into the credit business until the credit arm was actually bigger than the production arm. And of course, that's when you knew by the 1980s and 90s things were going wrong, was when General Motors or GE were more interested in lending money than they were in actually making anything. This is also true of merchant capitalists, the big department stores like Sears, who got more into credit than it did into actually selling anything. Government also provides consumer credit, massive underwriting of our mass consumption in this country, especially houses, through tax write-offs and FHA mortgage guarantees, and the whole Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae system. They also underwrite, when the government goes into debt to build a road in front of your house, a street in front of your house, that's also supporting your household consumption, because now you can drive your car up easily and get deliveries of your appliances and all the other goodies. Now, U.S. consumer debt load went up very rapidly after 1997 because of our role as world consumer, and maintained our standard of living in the face of stagnant wages. I'll come back to this again, of course, next time. Can't say too much, too often, that this kind of a graph that shows personal savings falling and personal debt, household debt going up by mega percentages is not a good sign. And of course, it was a sign of the bubble that blew up. Financial oversight, financiers provide oversight of industry. They actually, finance and finance capitalists are part of what they do, one of their positive functions is disciplining industry and also disciplining consumers. They're going to keep credit scores on you if you don't pay off. And under a normal system, you want to catch the people who are not good credit risks. Okay, you don't want to just throw money at whoever. Okay, you want to allocate capital and make sure people are good credit risk. That's why they do a credit check before they give you a loan. Why they demand 20% down payment. Until, of course, the housing bubble when they throw all that out the window. But in normal times, that's what they do, and what they should do is just keep a check that people are actually in a position to pay off the debt, will pay off the debt, have a record of paying off debt, and so on. For companies, it's similar, bringing in auditors who are kind of part of the financial industry, and investors. Investment companies who are over whole business is watching companies, watching industries, and deciding which ones are performing well and which ones are performing badly, and advising their investors where to put their money. But that is a kind of check on the performance of companies. So the companies have to keep up to snuff. It isn't just competition in product markets, like you learn in Econ 1, that keeps companies all up to snuff and all working hard. It's also the big brother of finance looking over their shoulder, because if they're not performing, nobody's going to invest in their stock is going to fall, banks aren't going to give them loans, and they're going to be in big trouble in terms of ongoing competition. And of course, behind the investors stand the rating agencies. Moody's, S&Ps, and Fitch are the big three who evaluate the quality of bonds, the quality of CDOs. The quality is mostly of securities. They don't really evaluate the quality of loans. They do securities. But they are, again, looking at the quality, the ability to pay back of debtors. And that's a positive function normally. But it didn't work too well lately. Okay, these guys are supposed to allocate capital over time, decide, okay, how long a loan, over how long period of time, and also between sectors, from industry to industry, and trying to keep profit rates more or less equal. And if a lousy industry is falling out of favor, its profit rates are low, capital isn't going to flow into that industry. It's going to flow out of that industry into hot industries, into growing industries. Of course, that's what you want. Capital markets are supposed to allocate money to the growing industries, to the new technologies, not to old, dying, dead-in-the-water stuff. That's what keeps capitalism dynamic, too. All right. There's this problem of time, of patient versus impatient capital. You need patient capital, people who have a long-term outlook, who can think in terms of 10 years or even longer, because a lot of productive investments, particularly big projects, big infrastructure, take years and years and years to put into place and even longer to return on investment. If you're talking about a high-speed train in California, you can't talk in 2-3 years. You have to talk in terms of a decade at least of trying to get it built, and much more than that in terms of the payoff. Now, that doesn't tell you whether it's a good or bad idea, but you can't think of it in terms of 2-year payoffs. There's also spatial allocation. Where should we be investing? And at the international level, this is obvious, where you get large quantities of savings being shifted out of Europe, the United States, and Japan, and investments going into Asia or Latin America or other fast-growing spots in the world. And that, of course, again, that should be good for the world economy. It's to move money where it's needed. It's provided to places that can use it to grow rapidly. California was a net receiver of capital flows for 100 years, and it helped the state grow. The United States was a net absorber of capital for most of the 19th century from Britain and Europe, which is a good thing. The United States was growing fast. It made sense. And now China is absorbing tons of foreign investment. But all this can fail. Financial oversight can fail. It can fail if the monitoring isn't happening, if Moody's and all are rating everything AAA based on what their buddies at Goldman Sachs said, or because they're afraid to buck Goldman Sachs, then the system doesn't work. It doesn't work if everybody wants 6% in 6 months, because the world doesn't grow that way. And one of the problems we've had is financiers who want very rapid returns. They want to see double-digit returns per year or even per quarter. They're only thinking, and this has become very common discussion in the business press back in the 1980s, of how the U.S. had shifted to this kind of fast finance. And what would that mean for the future of industry? I remember the whole issues of Business Week and all full of this kind of discussion. Well, it turned out to be bad for U.S. industry. Very bad. And but of course, the financiers said, "Oh, no, this is great. You got to really up the snuff quarter by quarter by quarter." And often you can't be quarter by quarter, and you need to be patient. Bandwagon effects. Of course, you're supposed to allocate like, well, tax bills are going down, electronics are coming up. Let's move more money over into electronics. But then you get something like happened in the 90s, when 1/3 of all the money in the stock market were going to electronics companies in the Bay Area, and that's nuts. That's because people were desperate. They didn't know where to put their money. Everybody said, "Oh yeah, the new economy, electronics.com bubble, woo, go baby!" And they jump on the bandwagon until that bandwagon crashes. And you got a similar thing with foreign investment in the 2000s too, the emerging economy cap funds or whatever they were, small cap funds, and everybody just pouring money into these things on the view that, well, it's Asia, it must be doing well. But you have to actually look at the investment, look at the country, look at the industry, look at what's going on. Okay. Then everybody will jump on Facebook, and then we'll see if it works. Look what happened to Netflix. Ooh, lost quite a bit of money there on a bad move. So apparently all new companies aren't going to succeed without fail. Okay, financing countries. Ooh, am I going slowly? I thought that was simple. Anyway, financing the state, financing development, and external finance. Okay, state debt. Financing states, actually, and I mean states as in government, has been basic to the financing of national growth. And since the beginning of capitalism, the rise of the modern states, there's been this very tight relationship, well, there still is, between state debt, state borrowing, and the development of a financial sector, and the concentrations of capital and accumulation of capital. And this goes back to the Italy and the Medici, who were financiers, who rose to the top in Florence, the Habsburg Empire, which was financed in the early 1600s by the Fuggers, before they bankrupted the Fuggers. Spain, which a lot of its empires was built through, in connection with the Dutch financiers out of Antwerp, before Antwerp was crushed and they moved to Amsterdam, and before Holland broke away from Spain. So you can see this very tight relationship. It's mostly to finance their wars and their palaces, some canals and so on that the state was building, when states in Europe in particular were so important in the development of the forces of production at this period. But this also was a period in which you get the emergence of the first bankers, the first great banking families like the Medicis and the Fuggers, and banking houses like the great bank houses and merchant exchange, banking exchange of Amsterdam in 1600. When the Brits come along, one of the first things they do after the British Revolution, or so-called Civil War, was in 1688 with the Glorious Revolution. This is when they reformed the laws, when they build out the Navy. They no longer, now Parliament rules, not the king, forever after. And one of the first things they do is create the Bank of England. And that stabilizes pound sterling, the currency, and also starts channeling the national debt through the Bank of England. And the Bank of England is financing the state, the British state, as it builds up its navy and other things that, that merchants want. And they start to issue state bonds, and these bonds gather all the savings of all these rich gentry out in the countryside and channel them through London, where they can be put to use in building canals or building the naval stores, or in some cases, building the state contracts to build ships or build canals or whatever it might be. That's going to create some of your first construction capitalists, some important early capitalists in Britain. Okay, and also, of course, what this means is money that's just sitting idle in the countryside gets not only put to use, but the rich people who have the money to lend start to make money off that. They start to earn interest. And you get the rentier class, a modern rentier class, shifting from being landlords collecting rent to being financiers collecting interest. I don't know why I threw this in. I think I'm going to skip it. Although I love it, but I won't. The U.S. national debt, we've heard a lot about that lately. So federal government borrows to do things like build the interstate highways in the 1950s and 60s. It borrows to finance its wars, and it borrows for cyclical stimulus. Those are the main things the federal government has borrowed for in the past. And when you get deficit spending, it has to be financed by borrowing. Well, it could be the printing press, but that's not going to last very long. It's usually by borrowing. So you see that the national debt, the federal debt, goes up over time. Lenders, of course, this is not something the capitalists dislike, because they invest, they buy treasury bonds, they get paid off. It's very safe, very sure returns to rich people, to pension funds, to bankers, and so on, who have the money to put large quantities into the treasury. Also, foreigners invest in the U.S. and get paid off. Now, the national debt you hear about, it can be the name of a movie, or it can be the name of a political whoop-de-doo last summer about the limits to the national debt limit. The national debt is the federal debt. It's not even the total government debt, and it's certainly not the total of all social debt. And generally, government debt, corporate debt, and consumer debt, household debt, are each about, federal government, local government, state and local, corporate and household are normally each about a quarter of the total debt load. And I should have had a chart of that, but I didn't. Now, that varies from time to time, cycle to cycle, but that's been the norm for a while. Now, building up heavy state government debt load can be very costly for the government. It starts when if interest rates are high, like poor countries tend to have to borrow at very high interest rates, and it easily eats into your revenues very rapidly. And, of course, debt is always relative to your ability to pay. So when people say, well, Social Security is bankrupt, well, it's not. It all depends on the rate of payouts versus the rate of revenues. And the rate of revenue depends on the Social Security tax rate, which you could also supplement with income tax. And if you cut income taxes, you cut taxes as Bush did, suddenly the same government expenditures produce a larger deficit and more debt. So debt is not only based on spending and borrowing, it's also based on revenues and need to borrow to cover lack of revenues. So when you have excess debt, you can print money, which doesn't work for very long, though we're doing a lot of that. Raise taxes, pile on more debt, short-term debt, and that really is the road to ruin. Or you can default, and countries do default. Argentina defaulted in 2002 and stopped payments on its international debt. Yeah, we talked about this before. I'm going to skip over that slide. Okay, financing development. Okay, now, with industry, most places finance their development internally. The vast majority of the finance for the development of the U.S. came from within the U.S., not from Britain and Scotland, not from someplace else, but from here. During the great long period of growth from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the last 200 years, most of it came from within. California, most of it came from within. Japan, most of it came from within. China, most of it's coming from within, not from abroad. And we tend to think, with globalization and all this money rushing around, that most financing of national development must be coming from abroad. It's not. And when it is, as in the case of the U.S. today, which, by the way, was my last slide, about why are we so in debt, it's a bad sign. It's a sign of trade deficit. Above all, our inability to produce enough to balance our trade, plus our war spending abroad. Okay, so this is true at all levels. It's based on savings, internal savings. As a country grows, you can set aside a certain amount of your national income as savings, which then can be used as investment for capital formation, investment in real productive capacity that's going to expand your output of bicycles and cars and toys and grain and whatever. Okay? So if you want high capital formation, you first of all need a surplus. Okay, you can't have no surplus. So that you may squeeze out of your peasants, or you may be running very high as it is in China today, simply because China is producing so much and selling so much to the world. Then you have to save it. Then you can't fritter it away. No leakage. You can't have your rich people running off to Swiss banks. Then you have to reinvest it, and then actually get productive capital out of it. And this is just a chart of 4 Asian countries and how from 1967 to 2007 and what their savings rate was as a percentage of GDP. You can see it goes up and down. But it's running around the 20-some% rate, which is pretty healthy, and definitely the road to development. And the East Asian self-financing model has been have cheap labor, so you get a high surplus. I should say cheap labor plus high productivity, you get a high surplus. Save the surplus, and have capital control so that the money doesn't leave the country, like it does so often in little countries, from Haiti or something. Haiti may have a surplus. It does. Poor as it is, has a surplus, but its rich people send most of the money abroad. Savings then have to go to investment, and you have incentives to make sure it's invested in good things, in important things. You want it to be invested in electronics, and you give special low-interest loans or bank assistance or tax credits for investment in electronics. And then you get your investment creates capital, normally a 20 to 30% rate, and so on. And every country's done this. Japan did it, then Korea and Malaysia, and then Malaysia's doing it, China's doing it. You can see China's gross national savings just climbing up and up and up and up in here. So it gets to this ridiculous point of going almost to 50%. Now that means, of course, if you're saving, you're not consuming. So consumers, half of the money that's raised is not spent on cars and houses. It's actually funneled back into industrial investment. No wonder industry's growing fast in China. No wonder it's not growing fast in the United States, where investment rates have been in the single digits. Well, the only way it can grow is through credit, and that means to build up a debt. Okay, and indeed you see that early developers that are growing very rapidly have very high savings rates. And here's Japan. You can see the savings rate falling dramatically over time, but particularly in the last 10 years, it really fell. I mean, it was much higher even before that, and then it fell even further to almost nothing. Now that means in part consumption rates are going up in Japan, and in part investment opportunities and investment is going down, which isn't necessarily a good sign for the Japanese economy. Here's U.S. savings going all the way back to 1930. 1930, you had negative savings when the Depression hit. World War II, people couldn't consume. There was rationing. You couldn't buy gas. There was rationing on food. Rationing on cars were not available. So people saved like crazy. And they came out of the war, and so did industries, by the way, because they were making super profits because of high capacity utilization. So both industry and consumers were saving, came out of the war, then they started spending, and savings fell very dramatically. But they were still higher than they were after 1980 or so. 85, you can see they start to fall quite dramatically as people go on a debt binge. So if self-financing means less reliance on borrowing and debt. But there are countries that are getting started, people are getting started, young people want to buy a house, they haven't done any savings. It's not because they're reprobates or they're not good countries or they're not good investments, but it's because they haven't had a chance to earn. They've not industrialized yet, or if you're young, you've been in school, you haven't earned anything yet. That doesn't mean you aren't a good bet as a young person once you get a reasonable employment salary for, say, a home loan. That might be a good investment. Same with the country, might be a good investment. But how much? So zero debt doesn't make sense because you need to go into debt to build big long-term stuff. If a country wants to build a railroad system or improve its roads, it's probably going to have to go into debt. But that improvement of roads is going to pay off. But you don't want your debt to rise faster than your GDP, or it means you can't pay it off. So what's a sustainable debt load? Nobody knows. It's very fuzzy-wuzzy. Like so many economic crises and so many economic things, it depends. And post hoc, we can often say, uh-oh, that was not a sustainable debt load in 1929-33. Okay? So when you go back and look at U.S. debt as a percentage of GDP, look what jumps out at you, right? In the beginning of the Great Depression, and then, oops, the 2000s. Those were unsustainable debt loads, and they collapsed. You can also see 1875. This year was the other greatest depression. This was the greatest American depression of the 19th century, was 1875 to 77, roughly. But we don't have good data on it, so it's hard to compare, usually. This is a nice chart. Yeah. It's a nice chart because it goes back that far. If personal savings rates were higher? Well, it means that you're spending less. So right now, if I go back to this chart, there's been a huge drop in this, and there's much more savings. There are also charts, I showed you a chart once before, I could have put it up here, that shows American savings going down, 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 and then since the crisis, it's gone up. And what that means is people are worried, they're paying off debts, they're not going out and getting new debts, and they're kind of raising their savings rate. They're not consuming. What it means for the economy is lousy consumption. And this is the economy's dead in the water, retailers going out of business because people aren't spending. Both they don't have the money because they're unemployed, or they lost their house, but even when they have their money, they're being more cautious. So the overall savings rate is going up. So that's the impact on the aggregate economy, yeah. So after 1933, why did it go way down? Did the debt roll down, or did GDP go up? Both. But all the loosey-goosey debt of the stock speculation, people were borrowing to speculate in stocks, and that all collapsed. Also, housing debt collapsed. So a lot of the debt disappeared, so that makes your savings rate go up. This one? It's going to go down again. It probably already is. I just don't have a graph. Yeah, that will go down as a percentage of GDP until it reaches some reasonable level somewhere, maybe down here. Yeah.
So with the whole debt load and consumption, how do you explain the fact that in the demographic of people who didn't lose substantial amounts of money, with anyone who didn't lose money during the recession in 2000 are actually consuming more, the increased luxury industry, luxury consumer goods?
The very top, say the top 10% are consuming more. Then there's maybe the next 20-30% who didn't lose their homes, or 40%, whatever it is. Most of the home loss is in the bottom 50%, right? So then there's a group of people who maybe didn't lose their home, but their home value is underwater. So they're not spending because they're going, holy shit, I can't get out of this. So later on,